Kia ora and welcome to the Maxim Institute podcast. My name is Jason and I'm thrilled to bring you this episode on an increasingly urgent topic, AI and our elections. Is democracy under threat? In this episode, a recording of our last Mike Night event, we'll explore the role of data and artificial intelligence in elections and how they're shaping our democracy. We'll discuss information curation, bias, manipulation, the rising threat of deepfakes, and how these factors can undermine public trust. We'll also reflect on the Australian voting experience and what it could mean for New Zealand as we head towards our own election. Our speakers at this event were two experts in the field, Dr. Paul Henderson and Dr. Jonathan Cole. Paul is a senior research fellow at Maxim Institute whose research focuses on human and artificial intelligence. Jonathan holds a PhD in political theology from CSU and is currently Assistant Director of Research at the Australian Centre for Christianity and Culture. In discussion with our Executive Director Tim Wilson, they'll explore the dangers of bad domestic and foreign actors, including other nations' potential interest in influencing our voting. They'll also discuss how much data third parties in the government have on you, what data can be used by political parties, and how AI will impact this election cycle. So, should we fear AI or welcome it? Let's listen in as Tim, Jonathan, and Paul delve into this critical topic and answer the question.
Well, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai, haere mai. Welcome to this Maxim event. AI and our elections, is democracy under threat? Good evening, my name's Tim Wilson. I'm Executive Director at Maxim, and it's great to see so many of you out tonight in the People's Republic of Grey Lynn to discuss this important and pressing issue. I would like to commence, weave us all together with a karakia. E te ariki kia aroha mai, e te karaiti kia aroha mai, e te ariki kia aroha mai. Amen. There are some rules for this evening. If you want to go to the toilet, you're a grown-up, you know where it is. It's out there. Follow the signs. If there is some kind of conflagration, and it may be the hot opinions that are being expressed, but if there's any other kind of conflagration, please gather, go out through the exits, and they are signalled by the green signs above the doors, and gather in the car park across the way. Look, if you want to vape, go outside. That's fine, but people may judge you. Well, you see, I actually done it back to front. This is my joke, and I've done it back to front, because typically I say if you want to smoke, go outside, but people will judge you. If you want to vape, go outside, but the smokers will judge you. But I messed up the lines. And now I can hear the groans of my colleagues going, he's done that one far too many times. But look, we're here not solely to laugh, but also to think a bit and to discuss an issue. I mean, AI, doesn't it seem to be somehow everyone started talking about AI in the past 3 months. Now, a lot of people have been talking about it before that, and we were certainly, I'm pleased to say, discussing this at Maxim Institute a lot earlier, but it's sort of come to the forefront of our public discussions. And the subject of AI and our elections, I think, is particularly pressing. And you may have thought, elections, aren't we just having one election? Why shouldn't it be AI and our election? Well, actually, this is scoped out for multiple elections, because AI is not going away. It's not going anywhere, and in fact, it will more intensely interact with our lives as time progresses. We're going to answer the question, or attempt to answer the question, certainly engage with it. And by the way, this is, both Jonathan and Paul have not completed the research that we're doing, but this is to give you some sense of where it's going and what is important and what needs to be grappled with. But the subject, I guess the overall headline is democracy under threat, and we hope to answer that in a way that is balanced, probative, but also provocative. Artificial intelligence, of course, is computer power that is able to outthink, outfake, outlearn, outright, do everything that humans can do at an exponentially more swift and powerful rate. We're going to be engaging with some of it's almost like the nomenclature of AI, so deep fakes, micro-targeting, nudging, data scraping. That doesn't sound pleasant. So we'll deal with that stuff, but also there'll be more familiar words, and I think more words that summarize what this is about, words like trust and transparency and the public square. We'll refer to overseas events in the United States, but also closer to home, because sometimes America seems like another world, not merely another country, places like Australia. And we're interested in the risks here in our country. Is democracy under threat here? That's the question we're hoping to answer. I'd like to introduce our panelists. Dr. Jonathan Cole, to my right, has a PhD in political theology from CSU, an MA in Islamic theology and Middle Eastern politics from the Australian National University, and a BA Hons in modern Greek language and history from La Trobe University. He is currently Assistant Director of Research at the Australian Centre for Christianity and Culture at Charles Sturt University, Canberra, Australia, and host of and this is where I do a plug, the Political Animals podcast. There's some good podcasts there. He also, for a period, worked for Australian intelligence, so he has that aspect as well. Dr. Paul Henderson will be very familiar to those of you who are long-time Maximites, if such a word can be used. He is Maxim Institute's Senior Research Fellow. He taught for 12 years working for education departments in Europe, Africa, and Asia. He has written education policy and designed and tested tertiary sector and national curricula. He holds degrees from Aberdeen, Cambridge, and Laidlaw College, and a PhD from Australian Catholic University. His research focuses on human and artificial intelligence. Paul, we recently released a paper, Artificial Intelligence in the Primary Sector, talking about AI's effect and possible effect in farming. And so this is one of a series of papers that we will be doing on the subject of AI. And I guess little fun fact, this morning Jonathan appeared on TV for the first time in his life on the AM show at 10 past 8, and Paul for the third time. And the reviews are very encouraging. So it's great that you're here. And at the risk of following in from that, one of the first questions they were asked is, what is a deep fake? Now, the reason that I think that question is important is that democracy, the true functioning or the correct functioning of democracy, relies on accurate information. So with that in mind, I want to turn to Jonathan and say, can you explain to us, for those who don't know, for those who have some idea and need clarification, what is a deep fake?
Yeah, thanks. Excuse me, it's a good way to start my time up here. I just want to say thanks for the opportunity to be here. It's a great honour to be in your wonderful country and to be talking about this important issue that is common to all of us as human beings. A deepfake, very simply, is the ability of a third party to take your real image or real footage of your real physical body, your face, and your real voice, and make you say and do things that you didn't do and didn't say, and to do it in a way that is indistinguishable from reality. Now, I must stress, we're not quite at that indistinguishable bit yet, but this technology, only a few years ago, you could really instantly tell the deep fake, because it was a bit fuzzy and a bit weird, and the voice didn't really sound like a normal intonation of a human. Just in the last couple of years, or indeed in the last 6 months, there's been a massive advancement. And this is a common story with AI that we always have to bear in mind. There are squillions of dollars of investment in many companies with thousands of the brightest human beings racing to develop this technology and to develop it. And there are people working on the technology.
Is that, Jonathan,
is
that because they see that it will be a financial bonanza if they, to use an expression, crack the code? If they have a highly developed and functional AI, they will be the next Google, the next technological goldmine.
That's certainly one of the drivers, but there are several others. But you do raise a really important point, Tim, which is to note, and it's worth us saying this at the outset because we're going to focus a bit on the scarier aspects of AI, but we have to acknowledge that it offers right now enormous benefits to human beings. It's what allows your pilots to fall asleep while your plane is automatically correcting course as it flies over the Tasman or something, and it helps you work out where you're driving the car. If you remember those old days trying to look at the map and go like this, you just plug it into the GPS. So, and in the health domain, it promises enormous benefits. So we have to acknowledge that humans could reap a great dividend from this technology. It's not all bad, but of course with the potential for good and benefits comes enormous potential harms of the kind that we haven't actually had to contend with. And this is how we have to balance. So of course, it's a mixture of idealistic aims to improve humanity. There's a kind of techno-utopian vision, ideology, if you want to call it that.
You know what? When I hear the word utopia, I reach for my revolver, if you don't mind, because often utopias are built on a lot of human suffering. Paul, I want to bring you in on this in terms of balancing risk and reward. What do you have to add to what Jonathan's saying? It's a risk-reward situation, isn't it?
Yes.
A haiku, ladies and gentlemen, from Paul Henderson. In terms of examples of deep fakes, Paul, do you have any that come to mind?
Yes, there are many. And a couple of things. Can I just preface with a couple of statements before that? As we're talking about AI this evening, there's several things that I think will be really helpful for us to bear in mind. One of them is that AI feeds on data. And if you are thinking about how effective is it, the quality of the data and the breadth and depth of data, that's what it eats. And it just loves data. So please bear that in mind. It's really important. The thing about the deep fakes is there's a classic one you'll all know of Nancy Pelosi, drunk in the lower house in the US as the speaker. And that did the rounds. And the fascinating thing about it was that the AI bots, stuck it into the social media. And of course, this really goes like wildfire across the US and in Australia and other places. And we all had a good laugh. And then we discover actually it's fake. It's a deep fake. But the thing about that is it was a pretty good one, but you could look at it because it was at the same time a little clunky, as Jonathan was saying, with the technology. But now you're seeing technology emerging that you can give written command to or oral command to, and it will generate original video clip. And I could talk about that later, but that has huge implications, not only for deep fakes, where it can capture your voice, your body, and actually generate new movie material, not just edit old. And secondly, in the wider domains, when you're looking at film industry, the implications of this sort of video technology is absolutely massive. You don't need props, you don't need sets, you just create the visual.
Paul, is that an example of, and one of the phrases is nudging, or one of the tools that can be deployed in nudging, perhaps? If you could say a bit about nudging and explain how that...
There are so many things that are flowing through my mind. One of them is that you made the point, information is important to elective processes. And with a deep fake, what you're getting is misinformation or disinformation, etc. And, sorry, can you go back to the question?
Yeah, the question was about nudging.
Yeah.
So you see an image of what appears to be Nancy Pelosi or a political figure doing something that degrades their reputation. You think, wow, either you think this is what I expected all along, given your views on that figure, or oh wow, this is something new.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. It is an example of nudging.
Why is nudging so important, and how does it work? Because I want to get to micro-targeting as well.
Well, can I go into micro-targeting?
Go ahead.
So look, the thing about micro-targeting, you've probably heard of it before. It's sometimes called psychographic targeting. What it does is it allows the scraping of data from many apps or things that you might have been using. So think of your rewards card when you go shopping, the data about you on that, or it could be your searches, it could be what you've been watching on YouTube, or it could be something from Meta or Facebook. Now, what happens is that data is taken and a profile of each one of us is built up, so that in a way you could say that the machine intelligence or the AI has a better understanding of who we are and our interests are than we do. But then, of course, that data can be on-sold to someone with political interests. They can say, Thomas, I see that you're interested in this. Do you know about this policy and why you should vote for us? But again, is this a half-truth? Are we getting the whole picture? Are there other policies which would mean we wouldn't vote? So we're being targeted and, to use the phrase you used, nudged to vote in a political way. This has happened all across Europe. I mean, really disturbingly, but micro-targeting is very, very powerful, and nudging is very powerful.
What do you think, Jonathan, that because the public square and democratic institutions, they function on trust.
Yeah.
And clearly devices like that, mechanisms like that, erode trust. How does that then feed into public discussions, elections, the democratic apparatus?
Yeah, I mean, the trust operates on many different levels when you think about it. Obviously, you have to have trust in the credibility or reliability of information, but you also have to have trust in the source of the information, because one of the things that is going to become increasingly prevalent and challenging in this new AI integrated world that we seem to be heading towards is that it's going to become extremely difficult to know what the source of information is, because it's going to become very easy to pass off that information as coming from someone else. And the deep fake is an example. It's trying to trick you into thinking that this person really did this, and you have no idea who is behind that. And this is going to be a huge challenge. And when you think about it, if we lose the ability to distinguish between reliable or factual and non-factual information, if we lose the ability to even know who's putting this out there, then that is going to have a massive impact on our democracy, our trust for each other, our trust in political leaders, in the process of democracy itself. And if people lose trust, we're in real trouble. And
something that you've spoken of in, previously as well is that at the moment, or maybe we've actually gone past that point, there was a sense that, that might be Nancy Pelosi, it might not be. Human judgment can still distinguish. But that's not going to be the case as technology advances. So give us a sense of the future, as we're saying, this is AI and our elections. Yeah. How swiftly might the future become the present?
Yeah, it's very difficult to look into a crystal ball and know where we will be in even just 5 years when it comes to AI technology. But the one thing we do need to be really clear about is we can talk about what exists today, and we've done that a bit with deepfakes, but we all have to use our imagination, because we're in a process of rapid advancement. So the technological capability of AI is not going to be what it is today in 5 years. You've got to think 10, 20, 30 years. And I go back to that point, millions and millions of dollars being spent by a lot of smart people in basically a race because of the commercial incentives, and that's a big factor because there's a lot of money to be made. Where the one thing that's certain is that AI will become more prevalent,
yes,
and it will advance. We just can't say exactly how far it will go, and there's huge philosophical debates about something called artificial general intelligence and superintelligence, and there are lots of different timelines, and some technologists think we might get there this century. But the one thing that's clear that all of us non-experts can grasp, which is what I'm going to keep ramming home, is that what exists now is not only impressive but consequential, and can have an impact on things like our democracy, it will get better. And whatever gets better can be used by health officials trying to make advances in caring for our health, but it can also be used by criminals, hostile foreign intelligence services, corporations that may have an incentive to swing an election one way or another because they have a big trade deal on the table or something like that. So we are entering into a new unknown world, I think, and none of us can really say exactly where we'll be in the future, but the pathway is clear. And one of the key things is we have to start thinking and adjusting our own mentality in thinking, how much do we want to allow AI to run our lives? Maybe it's great in business, but do we want it used in politics, for example?
And an example of that, I think, is, and Paul, we were talking about this earlier, is in regards of data scraping, that there were laws created in Europe.
Yeah, sure.
And the question is, technology advances exponentially. How fast does it, or how long does it take to make a good law? Now, typically fast laws are bad laws, but technology is much, much faster. Can you talk about the data scraping experience in Europe, please?
Yeah, sure. So this is in relation to something like the Privacy Act in New Zealand from 2020. It's modelled on the GDPR, the General Data Protection legislation, which was brought into Europe in 2016. Now, the interesting thing about this, and this is classic problem of working on drafting law and so forth, is it actually began in the late 1990s, but it took sort of over 16 years to finally land in Europe. Now, obviously in New Zealand it's not quite that slow, but the thing about it is they thought that they'd made so to speak, it bulletproof. But what they hadn't anticipated is that microdata could be scraped from different applications or searches or, as I said, reward cards or your Meta account. So they've been focusing, and we need to stop the big five, the Amazon, the Google, and so forth. We can do that, but not realizing that you could take a tiny fragment of data from one place, tiny fragment from another, reverse engineer, and get an exact profile on an identity. And even if you encrypted that in an identity, it could be a problem. And the point was that the legislation was years behind what is happening in the tech. And that's going to be a huge challenge. I don't think that's going to change. The tech is going to be 1 or 2 years always behind regulation or legislation.
I'm interested in hearing what Jonathan and Paul's experience is. So let's dive into it to answer that question. Paul's laughing already, so I think we have to go straight to Paul Henderson, Dr. Paul Henderson. Have you, in social media or on the internet, felt nudged / micro-targeted? How did you know?
Yes, many times and many occasions. The classic, I think, is I subscribe to Apple News, which allows me then to subscribe to a whole load of other journals within Apple News. And I started saying, look, I don't like this article, I'm not interested in it. And strangely, I started getting a whole load more articles on the same subject. And I was being really sort of corralled to reappraise. So I thought, like, I need to stop this. So I'm going to like these articles because that's going to stop it. So I liked them, and I was then doubly bombarded with the same stream. And I just thought, man, maybe I'm a hard convert on this subject. Yeah.
What about you, Jonathan?
Yes and no. I'm not really on social media anymore, and that's partly because I am trying, and I underline the word trying, to practice something I consider digital health. Basically, I don't want to be nudged. I don't want someone leading me to any particular waterhole, and I just hate interacting with people you don't know who they are. They've got pseudonyms if you're on Twitter, and I found it all unhealthy. But I will confess to being a massive consumer of YouTube content. If you know anything about how the recommendation algorithm works there, I was reflecting on this and thinking, okay, I know all about these crazy right-wing American figures. I am a conservative, so I consume a lot of what I would consider sane conservative. I'm interested in it intellectually, but I'm like, I know about Alex Jones and I've watched him on YouTube. How on earth did I discover all of these crazy wackos because I'm living in Australia? I mean, I shouldn't know about these people.
Stuff. Yeah.
And then I thought, that's how subtle it works. Like, it
That's
introduces you. It introduces you to people you never would have seen, and of course they're interesting because they're lunatics, and so you get engaged and you watch, and that's just an example of how an algorithm that's designed just solely to make you engage can actually shape your political views, because what engages you is more and more of the same content. It can happen on the left and the right.
More intense and visceral versions of what you're consuming.
Yeah.
I will say I'm kind of disappointed in the algorithm. I don't know if I'm disappointed in the algorithm or disappointed in myself when I look at my social media. Pardon me. My Google feed, for example, because I do Google News that selects, and it's based on what I click on. It's like, oh, do you really click on these topics? Yeah, it's actually, shall we say, it can be used as a spiritual discipline, a counter directive. Look, I think you were talking just before about you don't know where this is coming from. You don't know who some of these people are. Paul, that brings up the notion of transparency and the importance of a culture of transparency. I wonder if you'd unpack that for us.
Yeah, I think obviously with this tech, one of the things we need to think about is there a way that there can be transparency? And I was talking to Jonathan this morning, and one of the things he said, wouldn't it be good if we had a flag went up and said, look, we know we're talking to a human rather than an AI or a bot? And I thought, yeah, that's actually a fantastic idea. I'd really like to know, am I talking to an AI or am I talking to a human? Both can deceive, but somehow I'd draw some comfort on that. I think a second area which is really fascinating with the deep fakes, for example, is that they're looking at digital watermarks. And it's the same with, I don't know if you're aware of ChatGPT and the way that can generate text. There's a sort of idea that perhaps we can watermark this so that if students, for example, are getting their essays done by ChatGPT, that'll be spotted. You just have to run a scan and it will say, yep, watermark here, this is... So people are trying to say that information and clarity of information, transparency is really important.
Because of course ChatGPT also makes things up.
Yep.
So perhaps they might put that in a different font. Just to help us out. I mean,
the problem is, the scary thing is, it doesn't know when it's making things up.
Do you want to talk, Jonathan, about transparency, about why it's so important? And
yeah.
Because you had such a visceral reaction to not knowing where the stuff is coming from, who is the author, or what might be the author.
Yeah, I mean, I think I totally echo what Paul said, but the place to start is with this. We asked the question, do you think you've been nudged? Don't assume that you would even know.
Yeah.
Don't assume that people might not be shaping your opinion. It's not always going to be obvious. These are very sophisticated tools, and they're only getting better. And of course, the information ecosystem's very complex. You're interacting with lots of different people in your life. You're drawing on different sources. This is why transparency is so important, so that you know who is the originator of the information. Then you can find out something about their potential motives. So if it's a political interest group that's masquerading as some kind of charity or social group or whatever, I'm just making up a scenario, you need that transparency so that you can actually do a bit of digging and find out, and then you can make an informed decision about the reliability of the information. You can take into consideration things like bias. And this point about, I think really it's going to become, it kind of sounds shocking to say it, extremely important to maintain the distinction between human beings and artificial intelligence. And so with technology like ChatGPT, I want it written somewhere in the fine print. If a movie script was partly written by AI, I want to know if the song lyrics were partly written. I think these things need to be declared, because if they're not, then we start to merge in a world and you don't know if it's AI, human, a mix of AI and human. And I just go back to basics. And I think it's actually going to be really important to carve out a space for us humans to remain humans. And no, it goes back to that trust point, because sure, humans can deceive, but it's a lot harder when you are dealing face-to-face with the humans, with other human beings. We're actually incredibly intelligent and good at noticing subtle facial expressions.
There are facial expressions.
That's
I mean,
right.
I will say of my 8-year-old.
But there are no facial expressions with an AI, that's the problem.
No, that's it. Look, I want to keep moving in terms of where all of these issues, trust, transparency, technology, intersect with democracy. And if we look at, say, for example, some of the... Let's pull back and look at the United States, the 2016 election, WikiLeaks, all of that stuff. Can you just tell us a bit as to your take on what happened in the 2016 election?
Yeah.
And also how the timeline had such an effect.
Yeah. There were two very significant developments in the 2016 election, and the year is important. This is, well, it's not exactly 9 years, but it's 8 and a bit years ago from now. So we're talking technology and motivations and things that actually happened. One was we discovered that hackers working for Russian intelligence tried to interfere with the election. Now, I used to work in intelligence, and there's a big debate about whether it actually had any impact. And if you're not aware of this, they created a lot of fake social media accounts, both left and right. There were even attempts to organise protests from Russia in America, or come and meet here. You know, Black Lives Matter, crazy gun-loving conservatives. They were just trying to mess. I actually think what they were doing was experimenting and testing their capability, because this is how intelligence services work. So it's not that they have stopped doing it. They may actually be getting better. But the key thing is a foreign government attempted to literally mess around. Like, it was hard to work out what the motive was other than to sow chaos. So that's one thing that happened in the US election in 2016 that we should all be concerned about. The other thing was not exactly AI, although who knows whether AI was used in the background. This was the hacking of the emails of the Democratic Party. You may have heard about this, and it was released by WikiLeaks very strategically, and this is a really important point. The hack happened long before the election, or sort of, you know, at a certain time scale, but the release was timed in a weaponized way, days out from the election, to have maximum impact. And that one I think we do know had an impact in a very tight election. I just want to make one point, if I can take a liberty. We started with deep fakes, and one thing we didn't talk about was the kind of ways deep fakes can be weaponized. And I gave you that example about thinking about yourself. Well, think of what a criminal could do if they create a fake video of you in a compromising position. You know it's fake, but are your family going to know it's fake? Is your employer going to know it's fake? And they might try to extort you. But imagine a foreign power or a politically active group inside our own democracy that creates a fake video of a prime minister and releases it 2 days before an election, and it has them saying something inflammatory or reversing a popular policy or doing something illegal, perhaps taking a bribe. Now, we might find out it's fake 3 days later, but that's a day after the election. And if it's a tight election, one single video, which would definitely go viral if it was of your prime minister doing something outrageous, just think of the damage that could do. And the final one is, imagine in a tense bilateral situation where two countries are on the precipice of war and someone creates a fake video with one of the leaders.
A Cuban Missile Crisis situation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just drawing your attention to ways that this can be used very strategically to mess around with something as important as our elections in a democracy.
The other thing I'd say about that is that with the impersonation of deep fakes, we've been looking at negative examples where you do an attack on someone's character, but you could equally promote someone in a deceptive way. You could have them shaking hands with people who've just lost their houses after a flood, and people go, oh gosh, that's really good, we must vote for that person. And so it works both ways.
Mm-hmm. Interestingly too, we're talking about, part of what we're talking about is trust. And in an environment where interpersonal trust is degraded, there will be greater opportunity to leverage those moments where deepfake micro-targeting technology can have an effect. And just as a note, this has helped me to think, because I've been reflecting on how New Zealanders actually, we're quite suspicious of social media. We more perhaps than, there's a thing called the Edelman Trust Barometer, and we're actually more suspicious than other countries. But I wonder if, I had thought that's a sign, that's a positive sign, but I wonder if that's a sign of the fact that we are already in what I might label a post-trust environment, whereby we're increasingly suspicious, and we're the suspicion that can be manipulated. What do you think? Is that I don't know if I'm going down a rabbit hole there, Paul. What do you think?
I don't know. I genuinely need to reflect on it. One thing I was thinking about, though, is I was reading some research last week in relation to trust. Can I talk to this for a moment?
Yes.
And stop me if I go over, please. But it was fascinating. It was looking at, it was the KPMG, you can look at it, KPMG report on trust of society's 17,000 people polled across different nations. 24% of Europeans thinking, it'd be absolutely fine if AI ran our country. And so, but interesting, younger demographics were often who are more familiar with technology, use it all the time. It's always only ever been a benefit for them. So when you say, would you like to see more of this in your life, more of this in your government, then a lot of the stats are saying, yeah, there is that would be the case. There's a lot more I could say on that, which is fascinating.
Let's bring it a bit closer to home. I want you, please, Jonathan, to explain what is a teal. Because we're talking about the Australian experience.
I'll try and do it in about 33 minutes or less. But the teals were a series of independents in the federal election in Australia last year. The teal refers to the colour of the kind of T-shirts and placards they use. They were nominally independent, but all ran on the same platform. They were almost all women running on stronger action on climate change, the creation of a Federal Integrity Commission to deal with corruption, and a couple of other issues. There was a common platform, common sources of funding, but they ran as independents, and they targeted what we call blue ribbon seats, which are those socially progressive but wealthy inner city suburbs in Sydney, Melbourne, Perth, Brisbane.
Places like Grey Lynn, except in Australia.
Maybe I'm learning about this republic you have within Auckland, apparently. But we have.
That's my last attack on Grey Lynn. It's a lovely country.
Right.
Lovely country. It's a lovely place.
If I understood you correctly, we have many of these republics in our
we do.
big cities in Australia as well. But about 6 of them were successful, and this was one of the big things that changed the government from the Liberal National Coalition to Labor, and they took these seats that had been safe Liberal seats, our centre-right party, in some cases for generations.
And Paul, what role did technology play in that?
Well, I think quite a big one. There was some very, very powerful people who adopted some technology, and I spoke to 2 or 3 people on different campaigns. It wasn't just the teals, and they were using the micro-targeting that I was talking about and nudging.
So those apparatuses were
absolutely. They were commercial.
Yeah.
And it's worth noting, this was an unprecedented development in the political history of Australia. We'd never seen 6 independents across 4 cities knock off apparently safe Liberal seats with this common platform. And it shows you what a political campaign can do with micro-targeting. They just picked 3 or 4 policy issues. You know, the fact that they were all very accomplished, educated, professional women, this is not a slight on women, but they were running against men, and they knew from their research that the Liberal Party had a massive problem with women because they're basically all men, which doesn't help you win an election. So it's a good example of how it can change the whole dynamic of your political system.
Yeah. Look, we'll bring it back and we'll ask Jonathan and Paul the same question. I'll start with Paul. Paul, the risks for our country in elections, what do you see?
Well, I see multiple risks, and I think Jonathan can speak better on them than I, particularly on the intelligence and the external actors who might try to influence. But there is one that comes to mind, which I've been following slightly, and it's around data collection. So in New Zealand, we have the IDI, which is a sort of data infrastructure. And the general idea for
what does IDI stand for?
Integrated Data Infrastructure. Sorry, did you hear that? Integrated Data Infrastructure. But it's an idea which I think is really probably pretty good, but of course at the same time carries massive risk. So what's happened, and you can look it up, the IDI, is that all our health data, all our education data, our tax returns, any criminal records we had, anything on relating to justice, everything about us, which has traditionally been kept in different departments or different data centers, different data places, has basically been put together. And why that's good, or the argument for it, is A, it creates efficiencies. If you need to know somebody's health record or what's that, even down to driving license details, well, you can just go and get it. And for researchers, that can be a great bonus because you can do longitudinal studies of a person's life with all their data and say that you can make great predictions around that. But of course, the really serious risk is if that gets hacked. And last year, what we didn't say about the Australian elections is in last year, the Australian Federal Police were hacked, Telstra was hacked, the major telco, TGP was hacked, Woolworths was hacked. And so one of the points we were saying tonight is the technology is sharp and fast, and there are criminals who will use that technology to hack. Now, what happens if you have all our data in New Zealand in one place and that's hacked? That's tremendously powerful and could be used very powerfully in many ways, not just the political. The interesting thing is that in Europe, the idea was let's do the same, but they're now pulling back from that and saying just as we have departments or ministries of finance, ministries of education, health, we need to do the same with data and silo it. So we're mitigating the risk of putting all your eggs in one basket.
Paul, I wonder, you and I have spoken about a conversation you had with a Telstra person.
Yeah.
About that. Pardon me. Yeah.
Sure.
Can you unpack that?
Yeah. So I know a guy who's a Telstra executive, and I can never remember if it's TBG or TGP, but it's the second telco or perhaps not the second. Optus had also been hacked, and that's I think the second. But it's a really big telco, and the Telstra guy was just laughing, saying, well, they're cheapskates. They use the cheapest possible antiviral, sort of anti-hacking shields. And, well, at Telstra, that's just never going to happen. We are absolutely robust. Nothing will get into us. 3 weeks later, Telstra's hacked, and...
It's and look, I think in terms of shields, in New Zealand, we tend to believe that distance is one of our great shields, geographic distance from the rest of the world. But of course, there is no geography on the internet. What are the risks associated with that, Jonathan?
Yeah, I think just to go back one step leading into that, a thing with New Zealand, of course, is you're an advanced democracy with a digital economy. Like all other advanced democracies on the planet, you have an informational ecosystem that is susceptible to all of the kinds of techniques and technology that we're talking about. And like the rest of the democratic world, we're going more and more online, more and more digital. Now, the thing with digital, of course, is, I imagine in New Zealand, much like Australia, you've found comfort in the fact we're on the edge of the planet. Who cares about us? We're down here, a bit far away from the action. We're all nice people. You're a bit nicer than us, but we try our best. No one
keep trying.
No one would wish us harm. But of course, the opportunity cost evaporates in the digital world. So someone in Russia or China, New Zealand's not far away in the digital realm. You're no further than next door because this stuff can be done cheaply and effectively. And I think, this is a whole other conversation about the evolving geostrategic environment, but my advice, and we have experienced this in Australia, prefaced by the fact that we're not quite as nice, but notwithstanding that we have had some troubles with China that you may have gathered on the grapevine. Don't think for a second that no one's not interested in the outcome of New Zealand's election or important policies that might affect trade or big business deals, or that your own citizens or politically interested people might not have an interest in the outcome of elections. Of course, we all have interest in the outcome of elections, and there are these new techniques that can be used.
I was just saying, Jonathan, if you could speak maybe very briefly to that, some of the issues we've had with China and Aussie.
Oh, yeah, sorry, just for context's sake, it turns out that if you just say something extremely offensive, like maybe it'd be a good idea to inquire into the origins of COVID-19, then a certain country will not answer any phone calls from your ministers for 2 whole years. The ambassador in your capital will start punching you in the face publicly every other day of the week, and a whole bunch of industries will suddenly lose their access to your country for no reason for years, having a devastating effect. And I mean, I say it slightly in jest, but we have to understand that And this is important because it's not just technology. The geostrategic is just one thing that can intersect. So China is becoming more assertive. It has ambitions to dominate our region, and why wouldn't it? It's an enormous economy with an advancing and growing military. And this technology is one tool that it can use, and they have enormous resources to put into things like cyber espionage. So that particular context is changing. I guess what I'm saying is don't assume that China won't have an interest, just to pick one obvious whipping boy in the region, although maybe that's an Australian perspective, but don't assume for a second that it's all going to be an eternal peace and friendship for the next 1,000 years between New Zealand and China, because as we've discovered, you can kind of innocently offend them and they will apply enormous pressure. And you look at your neighbours in the Pacific, those islands are not too small, too peripheral for China to take a strong interest.
Let's pull back a bit in terms of the question of the evening, which is democracy under threat? I'm interested in, because we've been talking about risks, rewards, and this is a conversation that we're trying to balance those. Paul, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, sure. Look, I think democracy is always under threat. I think it's fragile and it can be quite quickly degenerate. And I say that having worked in many countries and lived in very, very difficult countries as well as very beautiful ones. Just in relation to that, I mentioned the issue of trust, that survey by KPMG. One of the fascinating things about that is it was basically saying that a country which has a slightly more fragile democracy than another country is really much more open to taking on AI. And robust, strong democracies are resistant to it because we like the notion of discussion, debate, plurality of opinion. We want to be involved, we want to be consulted. Whereas countries which have a slightly more authoritarian type of government actually are embracing the technology fast because it gives them better control over the people. Now that's particularly disturbing for democracies like New Zealand because it means that we're becoming fewer and fewer. There's a various democracy charts you can look at, ranking countries, and in the last 10 years, a number of countries which we felt were quite healthy are less healthy. So is democracy at risk? Yes. And is it fragile? I'd say yes, and it's something we just always have to struggle for if we value our way of life.
Jonathan, is democracy under threat?
Oh, I totally agree with Paul. You need to look at what's going on in America, and it's not all AI that's creating the problems of polarization and gridlock in Congress and corruption and the interests of money and the like. So there are many ways. Democracy is a kind of fragile ecosystem that needs to be protected. I think of it like a successful marriage, because a successful marriage, if I may speak from experience, takes a lot of work. It doesn't just happen. And so if you want to live in a robust and healthy democracy, you've got to work at it. And that's just standard operating procedures. With the introduction of AI and these new risks to democracy, I think we're going to have to work even harder and in new ways and in new things like transparency and accountability that have always been there are going to become more central, and we can all play a role as citizens, I think. And the only other thing I would add is that don't forget the poor cousin sovereignty, because with this new digital universe that we live in and advancing AI technology, it's no longer just militaries that are a threat to sovereignty or people smugglers or criminals trying to import drugs. There are these other vectors on the online world where outside influences can come in and try and interfere with your election, as we've been talking about. And so we have to safeguard our sovereignty in new ways and in new domains. And that's a new way of thinking about both sovereignty and democracy. And the first step really is
so we have
like
to informing people, but we actually have to understand what does it mean to live in this country and what is special about it. What do we want to defend? What do we value?
Yeah.
And this is the point that I want to get to, because again, Maxim is an organisation that tries to be unitive, generative, but also hopeful. So what can we do, Paul? What can we do that is positive?
Yeah, it sounds a weak answer, but I think it's an important one, and that is we can educate. So we can speak about the risks, look at the danger soberly, and then think, how do we reap the benefits from this technology, which is absolutely enormous, and I could speak to that for a long time in multiple domains, and how do we just keep the risks at bay? I do think it's a simple answer, education, but I think it's very, very important to start educating the public. I think the two other things which are difficult, and they raise questions in themselves which you might want to pursue in the Q&A, but I hope not too much. One of them is the legislation I touched on. I think we just need to be very good on privacy and other issues and make sure that our legislation is relevant, which may mean amendments every couple of years. But I do think there's a role for legislation in this. And it's the same, in a way much weaker, because when you talk about regulation from civil society or the big companies that are involved in the technology, self-regulation, I think, is an ideal. It is good when it works, but it doesn't always work. So if we've got some pretty strong codes of practice here around internet safety and harms is one of the major codes. But the question is, well, look, who are the administrators? What are the protocols? What sort of, if somebody is doing something which isn't helpful, what can we do about that? And so both, I think, regulation can be good. I say that tentatively, but I also think the same with law. I think we're a country where we can work this out and do it well and put those restraints on things which otherwise could be quite threatening.
Thank you very much. We're moving now to the questions from you, the audience. You've been listening, you've been talking. And we'll work through some of these. The question that I want to move to is, we've talked about AI as a functional servant for better or worse. Is there a greater danger in the possibility that we give AI the dignity of being a species? And this is something that's already happened in Saudi Arabia. So perhaps we can talk. You're nodding, Jonathan. So maybe you start there.
Shouldn't have nodded. Yeah, I think this is just the fact that we are even pondering this question is quite amazing when you think about it. There are some thinkers, I think, very aptly have likened the dawn of really effective AI as like the arrival of an alien species, that kind of event. Because if you think about it, if it ever happened that an alien species arrived on this planet, it would radically change our conception of who we are in the world or in the universe. Well, in a way where I think we are hurtling towards that.
You're saying the spaceship is landing?
Well, I don't know if it's landed, but it looks like the AI alien might land a lot earlier than the little green man with the things coming out or whatever. But so that's just a way of saying that we are confronting this question now. And really, the question for me is not so much, do we accord an artificial intelligence, and don't forget one day they may be embodied in kind of android and actually look and move a bit like humans, which adds to that difficult question. I think it's really a question about the definition of what it means to be human, which we haven't had to think about, and that is actually a more difficult question to answer, and I think that's what we should be focusing on. We should take this opportunity to think, what does it actually mean to be a human being? What is the value in being a human being?
What's the distinction between a human and a robot?
Yeah, and crucially, why is a human being of more value than an android or an AI? Because you can be sure that there will be some crazy philosophers who will come up with fancy arguments to say that we should care for the AI and the androids. And in all seriousness, it just raises these big philosophical questions, and we have to see, what I'm doing is giving a long answer, just mask the fact that I don't know what the answer to the question is. So I'm just sort of really pondering the nature of the question.
Yeah, I think we're straying into ChatGPT territory here. Paul, you have been, this is one of the things I think that attracted you to the area of research in AI, is it comes down to a fundamental question of what is a human being.
Yes, I mean, I was particularly interested in the question, first of all, how do we understand intelligence, human intelligence? What's artificial intelligence, and is there some commonality? But I think, as Jonathan was talking and you are posing the question, one of the things that came to mind was the question of consciousness. And I don't know if you remember Blake Lemoine, the Google engineer, quite recently, a couple of months ago, who was sacked for saying that he felt that there was basic consciousness with AI. And everyone said, no, don't be stupid. Consciousness is, if you want it, intelligence presupposes consciousness. You can't be intelligent if you're not already conscious. And so the philosophers ganged up on him, and other AI experts did. But then you have very, very powerful both philosophers, cognitive neural experts, and also leaders in AI technology who are saying, hang on a moment, it may be that this stuff does have basic consciousness. So the head of ChatGPT's OpenAI said, we think there could be basic consciousness. Same with DeepMind and others. And then you've got people like Daniel Dennett, who's a huge figure in how we understand consciousness. His argument is that consciousness is emergent, so that there's a lot of brain activity, and as a result of that activity, humans actually become conscious over time. Think of a child becoming conscious. Now, this sounds science fictional, but I actually think it's critical to the question, because if we suddenly say AI becomes conscious, then that becomes a whole different ballgame. Can you just turn it off? How do we treat it? And so on and so forth. That's why there are legal reasons why an AI was given citizenship in Saudi Arabia. It's around liability. You don't have to sue the maker, sort of thing. But there are other far more profound questions, which at the moment are right out there. They're science fiction. They're 15, 20 years away. But I have a feeling they're going to become more complex as the intelligence becomes more complex.
Okay, I've got a definitional question here. The question is, nudging is something that's not unique to AI.
Totally.
Any political ad, billboard, door knocking, etc., is just the same, telling you one side of the story. What makes AI technology, nudging, any different?
For me, I mean, that's a great point, and I would extend the point and say, I might even fall into the trap of talking about this new pollution of information as though we didn't have destructive rumors 1,000 years ago that could destroy someone's reputation. Humans have this ability. I think the difference, there is actually a difference in the examples that were given in that question. So when someone door knocks, usually they have a T-shirt on with, or at least in Australia, MP so-and-so, and they introduce yourself. They're a real human being, obviously. They might say their name. There is a basic transparency there.
You also have to let them in.
Well,
you have to open the door and they go, oh, hi, I'd like to talk about, and you go, no, I'm sorry, I'm too busy.
Right. And that's actually a serious point. You have the option to not respond because there's enough transparency to know, this is a bloody, campaigning canvasser or whatever.
Yeah, they're door knocking. Shh, kids, shut up.
And generally in most democracies, there are laws around political advertising. So I don't know if they do this in New Zealand, where you get the speed reader at the end that goes, authorised by blah, 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 at the end of the ad. But they are authorised and they identify the party. Now, that's not to say that there's as much transparency in the human political arena as we would like. But I think with AI, we're starting from a sort of complete lack of transparency. And it seems to be designed in a way that makes it very difficult
to insinuate itself.
And it's not just the lack of transparency of what the AI is doing. There's a lack of transparency on what's being researched, what the motivations are, what the financial interests are, how the AI is designed and what kind of rules have been given to it, what final goals and values. And so I take the point, but I think there's an additional challenge on the transparency front that is mitigated to some extent with real interpersonal action, and some of that might be around the political culture we have, and we hope that doesn't erode, where generally parties, if they want you to vote for them, they need to tell you what party you are.
Yeah. Paul, anything to add to that?
Yeah, quick anecdote. I completely agree with the question. It's nothing new under the sun, and you see it in marketing, not just political campaigning. I remember in the US, in Washington, in the early 2000s, there was a big debate about charter schools. Went to the Supreme Court, and there was one justice, Sandra Day O'Connor, who was the swing vote on the Supreme Court. Could she be moved to vote charter schools? Now, charitably, let's argue that the decision she made was a result of her meditations on the subject. But when I was in Washington, I met with a group, and they were targeting her, micro-targeting her, not with software, but they'd got psychologists to do a profile on her. And they knew what her favourite colour was, what her favourite sports team was, etc., etc. And they actually billboarded her neighbourhood, precisely profiling what she would be interested in. And interestingly, she went to the charter schools. Now, it's hard to say there's a direct link, but at the same time, the thing has been going on for years, trying to persuade us. I think for me, the real issue about the AI is how good some of the fakes can be, or the disinformation can be, or misinformation. And secondly, I think it's just the breadth of it. Imagine if you were running to be an MP and there was a fake that went out there, or somebody was nudging negatively or positively. That could go, as I said, I used the term like wildfire across New Zealand really fast. And that could be incredibly damaging or incredibly powerful. So it's in a way just the power of this stuff.
Well, I think we'll leave it there. It's just 9:15. Unless there's something that we're sitting in a pub and me holding a phone, it just doesn't feel pubby. If anyone's got a burning question, go now. I'll take it from the audience. Okay, hand goes up. Let's do it.
Hello, thank you. I think the role of AI in our democracy is inevitable.
Yes.
It is acting right now in our democracy through the AI algorithms in our social media, which is information that a lot of people are consuming. I think a more pertinent question that we should be asking ourselves, and I'll put it to you guys, is how can we use AI to save and protect?
That's a great question.
Yeah, and I think that it's a great question to end on. So the question that was asked is, how can we use AI to protect and save the democratic institutions that we all value so strongly? And I think it's a good way to end this ideally on a positive note. Jonathan.
I didn't nod, but anyway, okay. Look, fantastic question. One of the great ironies with the AI piece is that the best defence, or one of the best defence, maybe the only viable defence for a lot of what we're talking about, is also AI. So on the one hand, we may be entering into a universe where AI distorts, muddies, corrupts the political process with deep fakes. And the way we detect it is through other AI programs, because the sheer scale of the, if I could put it in this term, offensive use of AI can really only be matched by a defensive AI. The big question here is, okay, how much work, where is the balance of investment and work? How much attention and development is being paid on the defensive piece? And that there are people who are worried that too much of the technology is being developed, not specifically for criminals, but in a way that can be used by criminals, and less research and investment, and maybe it's not as lucrative, is being put into the defensive piece. But the reality is, and it's thanks for the question, because we should have said this, that actually we're going to depend on AI to protect our information space and our democracy to an extent. And I go back to one of my earlier points. It's enormous benefits, that's undoubted. A lot of potential harms, that's undoubted. It's up to us and the developers and government how we balance that. We want to maximise the benefits and mitigate the harms, and AI is going to be a powerful tool for mitigating harms from other AI. Quite a crazy world when you think about it.
Paul.
All said.
He began with a haiku, he ends with another haiku. I think, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together, please, for Dr. Jonathan Cole and Dr. Paul Henderson. So their work is over, but your work is not over. Do you know what Maxim is? We're an organisation that helps leaders make wise decisions. Are you interested in knowing more? Yes, you are. We've got some information. It's up there at the publications table. Go ahead, bother Ala and Kieran, get some information. Also, sign me up. Go and get one of those forms. write your email address. We won't blast you. We're not going to bother you too much, but this will keep you up to date with the issues that we're across, the research that we're doing, and the effect we're having in these public conversations. We are also an organisation that is independent. We are supported by incredible people, but we don't receive government contracts, so we are a charity. So if you want to help New Zealand leaders make wiser decisions, give us some money. How about that? Wouldn't that be awesome? The other thing that we want you to do right now, can you take out your phones? You have your phones, right? Who's on social media? I know the answer, all of you. So what I want you to do is scan the QR codes on your table, because that way you will follow our Instagram account. We will not scrape your data much. So take your phones out now and do it. Do it. Come on, you've done it? Have you all done it? Lou, come on, do it. All right. Listen, put your phones down. I want you to put your hands together for yourselves, for coming out to address this issue, for being such a great audience. Thank you and God bless you.
Thanks for listening to the Maxim Institute podcast. If you'd like to hear more from us and keep up with the rest of our research and analysis of politics and policy in New Zealand, you can sign up on the homepage of our website to get our monthly forum email and invitations to future Maxim Institute events. You can search and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. From the team at Maxim, mā te wā. Goodbye for now.